you doing? This is Adam Post, publisher of more than 1,000 comic books and marketing expert covering Bud Light. UFC has just been exposed by the Wall Street Journal. Bud Light's deal with UFC was to promote the UFC as a sports brand worldwide. This just came out today from the Wall Street Journal on November 9th, confirming our story from October 31st that the reason that UFC did a deal with Bud Light was not because they had shared values. It was because Anheuser-Busch is a huge global operation and they can really help UFC expand their business internationally. There's nothing wrong with that, but it would have been nice if Dana White had just told people that's the real reason for the deal. In any case, it's nice to be right sometimes, and this channel was definitely right about this one. Let's get into the story. Before we do, please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications. Give me a thumbs up. I really appreciate you guys. My first video on this, Bud Light pays record bribe to UFC to fix destroyed brand. And it is a big amount of money. It's much more than $100 million. It is not $100 million as reported. From Bloomberg, UFC signs its biggest ever sponsorship deal with Anheuser-Busch. But as Bloomberg explains a little bit later in the article, this deal is bigger than their $175 million fight kit deal with Crypto.com. How big is the deal? We don't have exact numbers, but it's bigger than $175 million. It is a lot of money. The next video we did was UFC Destroyed facing boycott after Bud Light sponsorship deal. This video really got me thinking, and this one was trying to figure out what is the possible reason that UFC would be risking its brand. It's not because Dana White is a tough guy and because they have shared values. Then I kind of figured out, no, okay, I get it. After doing some research, the deal really was about Bud Light and UFC connecting because, yes, UFC liked the massive amount of money they were getting paid off to do the deal, but really it was about building UFC internationally, leveraging the relationships that Anheuser-Busch already had, especially with China. It's very difficult to do business in China. You really need to know people, and Anheuser-Busch knows a lot of people. They've been there for more than 10 years. They're doing a lot of business in China. From the Wall Street Journal, how Bud Light won UFC-backed global ambition meets a worldwide footprint. Bud Light hopes the deal will bolster its reputation among mixed martial arts fans. UFC hopes Anheuser-Busch InBev can help promote its sport around the world. Anheuser-Busch can absolutely do this for UFC if they choose to, and Anheuser-Busch can also tell UFC, look, if you get really damaged in the United States, we'll make it up for you in China, or we'll make it up for you in Brazil, or we'll make it up for you, believe it or not, in Africa. They have a lot of operations all throughout the world. I don't think UFC should have done this unless Dana White was at least going to be honest with people and then hear people out and get their feedback, but I don't control UFC. Bud Light's partnership deal with UFC last month was a rare win for the beer brand this year, as the year was dominated by a damaging consumer boycott over its collaboration with transgender influencer Dylan Mulvaney. The brewer, which had first sponsored UFC from 2008 until 2017, took back the official U.S. beer rights from Modelo Especial, the same brand that surpassed Bud Light this spring as the top-selling beer in the U.S. Its parent, Anheuser-Busch InBev, was praised by UFC chief Dana White for having core values in line with a mixed martial arts promoter. But despite Bud Light's 2023 sales slump, executives at TKO, the new parent company of UFC, has just as much of a win for them. UFC plans to use the global marketing reach of Anheuser-Busch InBev to help promote its sport around the world and compete for sponsorship dollars alongside the biggest, most lucrative of leagues inside and outside of the U.S. Quote, we've made a concerted effort to grow from tens of millions of dollars of ad sales for UFC to a number that would put us on par with other major sports leagues today, said Andrew Schleimer, chief financial officer at TKO. The deal established Anheuser-Busch InBev as UFC's global beer partner, in addition to making Bud Light UFC's official beer in the U.S. Anheuser-Busch's international scale is what clinched the deal, according to Schleimer. So this is now out publicly in the open. It could have been out on October 24th, like when Bloomberg was writing an article about it, but they waited this long to see how people would react first before they became honest about it. UFC previously had signed some local deals with other beer brands, but none will be in place by the time Anheuser-Busch InBev takes on the global partnership in January 2024. Local Anheuser-Busch InBev brands around the globe will sponsor UFC media properties via signage, commercials, and social media, as Bud Light will do in the US. A deal with one global beer partner provides consistency across markets, Schleimer said. Quote, while the cash value of these deals are of extreme importance, when we look at these types of relationships, it's almost as important to determine or to see the marketing value, Schleimer said. The sponsorship deal, the financial details of which weren't disclosed, is the biggest to be signed with UFC. TKO Chief Executive Ari Emanuel said Tuesday on the company's first earnings call. TKO hopes the marketing firepower of the brewer will drive UFC subscriptions, ticket sales, and viewership levels, particularly in Mexico, Brazil, and across South America, according to Emanuel, who is also the CEO of TKO's majority stakeholder, the media and talent agency Endeavor Group. The expiration of Modelo's deal with UFC at the end of this year will conclude a 6-year sponsorship during which the beer's brand placed a theme of, quote, fighting spirit at the heart of its marketing strategy. Modelo bid again for the U.S. beer sponsorship, but UFC ultimately chose to go the global route, people with knowledge of the deal said. Modelo last month said it would, quote, invest in the right partnership opportunities that further accelerate our momentum. Modelo's issue here is they're not as international as Anheuser-Busch, so even though Bud Light is a toxic U.S. brand, UFC doesn't care that much. Modelo in the US is owned by Constellation Brands, which sells wine and spirits in around 20 countries, but doesn't distribute beer outside the US and Guam. Anheuser-Busch InBev accounts for around 1 of 4 beers sold worldwide, including Modelo in other markets outside of the United States. That means Modelo could theoretically pop up as a UFC sponsor under the new deal, just in markets outside the United States and under the Anheuser-Busch InBev umbrella. A spokeswoman for Anheuser-Busch InBev did not comment on that possibility, saying the company is focused on Bud Light and Budweiser with regard to UFC. Quote, we have nothing but great things to say about Constellation, but it was the right time to seek a partner that would help us continue to evolve as a global brand, Schleimer said, adding that UFC and Anheuser-Busch InBev came together via Endeavor's cultural marketing agency, 160over90, which counts the drinks giant as a client. Endeavor, which owns a majority stake in TKO, which owns UFC, also owns an agency called 160over90, which is a cultural marketing agency, and the cultural marketing agency coordinated all this. This was well beyond, and that is something I said, I think in the first video I did, it felt like it was something way beyond Dana White. He wasn't the decision maker here. Quote, we want our partnerships going forward to reflect the global nature of our business, and the Modelo deal was a US only deal, Schleimer said. But though they really should have just been honest with people, we all understand like the international way of the world. We do appreciate though when companies and brands are honest with us, not when they tell us a fraction or half of the story. Always better to be upfront. There are some rules. Publicly traded TKO Group Holdings was formed this year after Endeavor combined the fighting franchise with a newly acquired majority stake in World Wrestling Entertainment. UFC executives before and after the formation of TKO worked to position UFC as a high-octane and occasionally bloody combat sport that is also attractive to household brand sponsors, sports marketing executives said. The promoter gets its name from the Ultimate Fighting Championship, which in its infancy in the early 1990s gained a reputation for brutal bouts governed by the promise that, quote, there are no rules. There were, in fact, some rules, such as, quote, no eye gouging, and UFC added more as the sport grew in popularity, while some critics called it barbaric. It also added judges, time limits on fights, and a scoring system. It got a boost in 2018 when UFC struck a distribution deal with Disney's ESPN, following years of broadcasting fights on Fox Sports, and before that, the young adult male-focused channel Spike TV. Quote, there was a point in time where Walt Disney and ESPN would not do a deal with UFC, Schleimer said, buying into an audience. Some brands still steer clear of sponsoring UFC, according to Pat Hefferman, Senior Vice President of Strategy and co-head of sports sponsorship consulting firm Jack 39. Such deals involve plastering brand logos around an octagonal cage that's no stranger to blood and injury, he said. Quote, we've looked at it for some brands and there's been some caution because the sport is inherently violent, Hefferman said. But UFC's young audience strongly appeals to other brands, particularly in the beer industry, which has struggled to recruit new legal drinkers, according to Hefferman. That's even more true for Bud Light, which also has to regain drinkers who may have sworn off the beer earlier this year, he said. UFC markets itself as a sport with a young, diverse group of supporters, according to an advertising pitch deck seen by the Wall Street Journal. UFC says some 45% of its fans are 18 to 34 years old, and the median age is 36, according to the deck. Some 21% of UFC fans are Hispanic, 15% are African American, and 35% are women, the deck said. Just under a quarter of people considering Bud Light are already fans of UFC, according to November figures from YouGov, a market research company that runs daily surveys about thousands of brands. A recent survey supposedly found that over 40% of Bud Light drinkers who refuse to drink the beer anymore said that they are now more open to coming back to drinking the beer following months of marketing investment from Anheuser-Busch, according to Anheuser-Busch InBev Chief Executive Officer Mike DeCaris on an earnings call last month. But to just check that number, because it's a little bit of propaganda, over 40%. Okay, wait, that means 60% of at least the 30% of people throughout the country that refuse to buy the beer anymore will not buy the beer again. That means of the 30% lost, they're claiming they think they can get back 12% of that 30%. But 18%, the larger percentage, is definitely gone. I question that. Even of that 12%, what percent really are going to actually want to drink Bud Light again after they rebranded it to a transgender-focused niche beer? It used to be a mainstream beer that everyone of every kind would be happy to drink. After the Dylan Mulvaney promotion, they changed that forever. CEO DeCaris emphasized the global reach of the UFC deal and the synergies between both brands. Quote, UFC and Anheuser-Busch share these American roots, a track record of employing American people, driving economic prosperity, supporting veterans, and first responders, DeCaris added. Why are Bud Light and UFC coming out now and admitting, okay, yeah, well, the deal really isn't about values. The deal is about international distribution, trying to help Anheuser-Busch in the United States, and at the same time have Anheuser-Busch help us in multiple foreign countries to push our UFC sport? Why didn't they just say that in the first place? I don't know. I think they must have assumed people wouldn't understand that. Of course they would understand it. It's not complicated. So instead, Dana White went out on conservative talk shows, Hannity, Charlie Kirk, a few other platforms, and said, well, we did it because of values. That's what's really important to us. And just diminished everyone who didn't agree with what Anheuser-Busch did, violating the trust of their customers by pushing out Dylan Mulvaney as the beer spokesperson. Anheuser-Busch InBev owns the Bud Light brand, but they do not own the customer relationship. That always has to be mutual. You don't have to buy their product as much as they may want to sell it to you. If you want to buy it, you can buy it, but you don't have to buy it, which is why someone who makes something should always respect the person who buys something. And that's where they made a mistake here. At least we know the truth. And I am happy to say we did catch this back on October 31st on my channel. And I wouldn't be doing these stories, though, if you guys didn't keep supporting me. And you guys have been great. I really appreciate all the likes and the shares and you guys taking your valuable time to check out what I have to say. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Always love to see your ideas. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications. Give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another video. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.